So you're about to take step 2. I really hope this video sets you up for success. Thanks for all the support for my step 1 advice video. It is one of the most popular videos on my channel. But for those new here, my name is Alex Saw. I'm a 4th year medical student applying into residency this fall. And this is how to crush step 2 in 5 weeks. So today I'm going to start off by saying some tips and tricks I wish I knew before studying, before moving on into my favorite resources, and then finally finishing off with my schedule. I know this is a super stressful time period, especially with step 1 going past fail and more emphasis on the step 2 board exam score, but I really hope this video sets you up for success. The first piece of advice is focus on yourself. Do not compare yourself to peers, other YouTube videos, or even myself. Really focus on yourself, keep hustling, and trust the process. With that being said, I'm very transparent with my numbers in this video. I found that when watching other YouTube videos when I was studying, they would lay out their numbers, and I found that very helpful. As well as for my step 1 advice video, I got a lot of good feedback saying that the numbers were helpful, but remember, focus on yourself and don't compare. The second piece of advice is look at the big picture when answering questions. Try to focus on what concept is being tested and learn how to answer the questions. The best way to do this is practice, practice, practice. The third piece of advice is do not blow off ethics and quality improvement. Because of the cheating scandal, USMLE has rewritten their exam as well as added more concepts that are kind of unconventional, such as ethics and quality improvement. So later in this video, I'll be giving you some of my favorite resources that can prepare you for the new exam. All right, so now let's dive into my favorite resources. First, Divine Intervention. Second, UWorld. Third, AMBOSS. Fourth, Free 120. Fifth, CMS Forms. And sixth, Emma Holiday and Dr. High Yield. All right, my first and favorite resource was Divine Intervention. He is a godsend. He has a photographic memory and is able to recall all of the clinically relevant questions that may occur on the USMLE Step 2 exam. He is available on Spotify as well as his own website, and I nicely compiled a spreadsheet of all of the best podcasts you should listen to, which you can do while you're walking, exercising, or just doing whatever, but it's great to both passive as well as actively listen to. The second resource is, of course, UWorld. UWorld has 4,000 board-styled questions. I went through my first pass-through throughout clerkships as I was studying for each shelf exam, as well as when dedicated rolled around, I went through my second pass-through, so I had 2 pass-throughs through all of the questions. UWorld also has 3 self-assessment forms, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. The third resource is AMBOSS. AMBOSS has many board-style questions. I went through about 1,000 of them, but it was a little bit cumbersome also going through UWorld. It's also good for looking up concepts that you find a little bit confusing, but the main thing that AMBOSS does very well are the ethics as well as the quality improvement questions and articles that you should definitely go through before step 2. The fourth resource is the most representative of the actual test, and that is the USMLE Free 120. So every few years, USMLE releases 120 board-style questions that may occur on the exam. These are good to go through because they may ask some questions that you may not see in the question bank. And when I say that, I mean drug ad questions as well as ethics and quality improvement questions. I thought that on my actual test, about 1 in 7 were some of these unconventional questions, but for my friends who took the test, they felt that the Free 120 was more representative of what they actually took. The fifth resource are CMS Forms. If you're looking for board-style questions that are really targeting high-yield topics that may occur on step 2, then you can definitely buy these CMS Forms off of the USMLE website, or if you want to talk to some upperclassmen who have gone through step 2 before you, I'm sure they can help you out. And sixth, some additional resources that you can go through that are super helpful from my favorite teachers are Emma Holiday as well as Dr. High Yield, which I've laid out in my spreadsheet, which I'll be going through right now. I'm so nervous to show you guys this. Okay, well, as you can see, I laid it out by a week. Like I mentioned in the video, I had a dedicated period of 5 weeks, but I technically started studying for step 2 about 9 weeks out from my actual test. But as you can see right here, I was in my psychology as well as my neurology rotation. As you can see, I took my psych shelf on March 27th and then my neurology shelf on April 26th. So essentially, I didn't really have to study that much for psych and neurology because I'd already studied that beforehand going into dedicated. On the left-hand side right here, I laid out all of my favorite resources: Divine Intervention, Emma Holiday, Dr. High Yield, AMBOSS, On King, UWorld, and White Coat Companion. If you have boards and beyond, then I highly recommend getting the White Coat Companion textbook, which lays out some more information in the table format. I also listed out all the systems that need to be studied: OB/GYN, medicine, family med, surgery, peds, neuro, and psych. Alrighty, let's jump right in. So I went through the AMBOSS question bank. I did about 200 questions per week, very manageable, about 30 questions per day. For those who really like Anki, I kept up with my Anki cards throughout clerkships so that I would have to study a little bit less. I wouldn't recommend that unless you really enjoy Anki, but if you're not really an Anki person, then just forget about it. On April 1st, I reset my UWorld. The reason for that was because I went through my first pass-through throughout my third year of medical school of clerkships, and then I wanted to reset so that I'm doing every question new. So I did about 300 UWorld questions per week leading up to dedicated. That's about 1 block per day, and it's very, very manageable. And then as soon as dedicated hit, I ramped things up and I started doing about 1,000 UWorld questions per week. On top of that, I'm also taking diagnostic tests. Diagnostic tests are the key to doing well in this exam because it kind of lays a benchmark of where you are, as well as building up endurance for the actual test, as well as understanding these board style questions, because oftentimes these question banks don't reflect the board style questions holistically. So I started off by doing my AMBOSS free diagnostic. AMBOSS, for everyone, has a free diagnostic test to kind of give you your starting benchmark. I also did my MBME 9 as well as MBME 10. So about every other day I was doing a diagnostic test for my first week of dedicated. And in between those days, I would be doing my UWorld questions. For week 6, I did my MBME 11 and then UWorld self-assessment 1 and so on. That's documented. And I'll be going through my test scores a little bit later to kind of give you an understanding of how difficult some of these tests are, as well as just how I'm doing over time. So about 2 weeks before my test, things started changing a little bit. I started incorporating CMS forms. I was doing about 200 of those questions per day to kind of give me a more focused look on the high yield content, as well as kind of targeting more board style questions that may occur on the test, which I'll be going through a little bit later. I also started incorporating AMBOSS ethics as well as quality improvement. Like I mentioned, do not blow those off. You definitely need to keep those on the radar. I also have biostats. I highly recommend, very similar to step 1, is going through the Randy Neal videos. He really lays out everything, but biostats is not as emphasized on step 2 as it is on step 1. And then my final week, I laid out several links. So we have the free 120 from 2023, and then I also incorporated the explanations. AMBOSS also has high yield concepts, about 200 of them that I highly recommend going through. I did another UWorld self-assessment, went through more of the social sciences as well as the quality improvement. Went through more biostats, I started incorporating Dr. High Yield, and then I also added the free 120 from 2018 as well as free 120 from 2021. Those are also really good to go through to get to kind of understand the board style questions. I do want to mention that the 2018 questions don't have those changes that USMLE started implementing around 2020. So just be aware of that, but those are still fun questions to go through. I also think that one thing I struggled with were the pediatrics and family medicine style things. So I added a prevention and screening guidelines link to a Quizlet, which I highly recommend going through if you struggle with those as well. I'm sure that you're looking at all of these giant boxes right here. These are basically just random notes that I wrote for myself that I got from other sources to kind of help guide my process throughout step 2. Hopefully you don't have to go through it because you're watching this video right here, but I ended up going through the Divine Intervention Basic Plan, which I'll jump through right now. So in this tab down here, I have the Divine Intervention Podcast, Step 2 CK. Right here, I laid out all of the high yield Step 2 podcast videos that you should listen to if you have time by Divine Intervention. This link right here leads you to a Google Doc with all of the notes from the podcasts. If you're a visual learner like myself and you prefer seeing words instead of being an auditory learner and listening completely, it's nice to listen to the podcast while you're scrolling through these notes. I ended up just pulling this up on my iPad and scrolling through because that's how I learn best. So I definitely want to include that resource right here. So these are all the podcasts on the left-hand side, and there's a substantial amount of them that I highly recommend going through, about 118 of them. On the left-hand side, if you're limited on time, then go through the highest yield divine intervention podcast. And these are these ones right here. I went through and I hyperlinked all of the podcasts. You can just go through, click, and it opens it up on Divine Intervention's website directly. If you get a little bit tired of Divine Intervention's voice, because sometimes I did because I was listening to him for many, many hours, then I added some other links by Dr. High Yield. So I incorporate all of the high yield summary videos that they have, as well as Emma Holiday right here, where she has the medicine, pediatrics, and psych overviews. And right here next to the vaccines podcast, I put Be Dr. Hib, Mad HPV, Very Dim, which is the shortcuts for the vaccine schedule. Because when you're taking step 2, you don't want to be thinking about, you're already thinking about so many things, and the vaccine schedule is the last thing you want on your mind. So I added a video for a USMLE shortcut because this is what I used for memorizing the vaccine schedule. All right, down here, very important, are the AMBOSS ethics and quality improvement articles. I linked each one right here. Which I highly recommend you going through if you have some extra time. I think you should definitely make time for these articles. They also have question banks which you can go through as well to make sure that you're getting all of the high yield information. And in total, there's about 166 of those questions that I highly recommend going through. All right, now for the crazy stuff. You know how I mentioned the CMS forms as well as the MBME forms that I took, as well as all the other practice tests? Well, I documented every score that I had, and I decided to be transparent, very similar to my step 1 advice video, with all my scores to kind of lay the framework of how I improved over time. I actually got this inspiration from another YouTuber who posted a whole bunch of step 2 videos that I would watch, and her name's Alyssa. I'll tag her down below. But she posted a step 2 tracking spreadsheet right here as well, where she documented all of her CMS forms as well as her self-assessments. And I took a screenshot and put that in my sheet right here. I took it one step further. I decided to post my shelf scores. I did a lot of thinking, and I realized that my YouTube channel is to kind of document my experience throughout medical school, and I want to be that big brother that kind of shares all the information possible to provide the full context and perspective on how I approach step 2. So right here you can see my CMS form. I put my percentages right here, as well as the percent that I got on my shelf test, as well as my percentile. And I did that for every single specialty: surgery, psych, peds, OB-GYN, and so on. I also put some important links at the top. After you take the test, you have the percent correct, but you don't have that estimated step 2 score. So some of these are converters that you can click on to better predict what you would get on the actual step 2 test. So for UWorld self-assessment, I took UWSA1 17 days out. I also documented how many days out I took it from the test, and I shot in the 28th percentile, 5 days out, 40th percentile. 7 days out, I took UWorld Self-Assessment 3, which I don't recommend. That was a confidence destroyer right before taking the test a week out. Yeah, take these tests at your discretion. Right here, I also documented the MBME scores that I got, as well as the time frame out from my test. As you can tell, I did not do well in the beginning, and then I really studied hard. And for some reason, I became very stagnant around the 240, 245 range, which was very disappointing, but very similar to step 1. I hustled, and eventually I was able to break that plateau and shoot up for 259 on MBME 14. So I guess the message of this story is to really continue working hard, trust the process, and eventually you'll break your plateau. I also put the scores of other self-assessments as well as the free 120s right before I took the test. For this last tab, I decided to put a chart with the USMLE score with the specific percentile for step 2. The reason for that is because I think everyone needs to go into this test having a specific target score. Of course, everyone wants to shoot that 270, 280, but are you really capable of that? And the reason why I put this in is because I think the percentile that you get on your shelf scores consistently may be predictive of what you may get on the actual percentile of the step 2 score. With that being said, I know a lot of people who did not do well on the shelf test, but did very well on the step 2 test, and that's because they just are able to lock in on these super long long test and they're able to grab different pieces of information a lot better than focusing on one specific system. But with that being said, if you are shooting in the 40th percentile consistently across the board for your shelf test, then chances are you'll shoot around the 40th percentile for step 2. That's the last takeaway point I wanted to show you right here. I really hope this spreadsheet is helpful, and remember, do not compare yourself to my scores. Really stay in your own lane and focus on yourself and keep hustling, and you guys are gonna do great. As for a daily schedule, in the morning I would wake up as early as I can. I would go through 4 blocks of UWorld, either in tutor mode or test mode, depending on how I'm feeling, or I would take a practice test. For questions that I found a little bit difficult, sometimes I would look up in ChatGPT specific things such as give me USMLE styled questions about PCOS, for example. During lunch, I would listen to Divine Intervention for 1 to 2 hours while going for a walk as well as working out. In the afternoon, I would check my CMS forms, go through my practice tests, or go through another 3 to 4 blocks of UWorld. And finally, in the evening, I would relax, recharge, and sometimes passively listen to Divine Intervention. It's really important that you take breaks because this is a really long process over the next 5 weeks. And before you go, I want to give 3 more pointers. 1, you are not defined by your Step 2 score. All I ask for you is to try your best, keep hustling, and do not burn out. Number 2, make sure you are in the right headspace. The day of the exam is very important, so make sure you're well fed, get some good sleep, and you're well relaxed because it is a really long test to go through. And 3rd, keep in mind that residency programs look at you holistically, so be sure to hustle in other aspects of your life so you can compensate for any unexpected outcomes. What I mean by that is hustle in research, extracurricular activities, as well as getting the best grades you possibly can in clerkships. You've got this, and I have no doubts you are all going to do amazing. Subscribe for more medical school advice, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.